Hi there, hope you're well. This is Samit from TalksOnGround. Before 30 days or 40 days, 60 days from today, I'm sure you never heard the word tariffs. But today it's 125%, 104%, 52%, X percent on cars, Y percent on semiconductors, another percent on Mexico, another percent on China, another percent on India. That's all we've been hearing. So today we'll discuss why is it happening and what is at stake. Why is Trump doing this? And if you don't know what tariffs are and why Donald Trump has been imposing them, then you need to continue to watch this. So today we will uncover what is the real purpose of Donald Trump and what does he get out of it, and actually who's winning this so-called trade war, which is disguised as a tariff war. So, before we go forward into what is happening today, we must understand what happened when Trump was in power in the first term, which was in 2017 to 21. Within a few months into his presidency, in the first term itself, he had launched a tariff war against the Chinese. And why did he do that? Because all his political support comes from the US Middle West, which is really inhabited by rural and semi-urban communities that at one point of time were really the powerhouse of US manufacturing. But over the last 30, 40 years after globalization has taken effect, all of those people have lost jobs. In fact, most of them. And all that manufacturing has moved out from the US into other countries, especially into China. So, what has happened over the last 30, 40 years because of globalization is that the US has become richer. The Chinese have, of course, exploded into like the top tier of the manufacturing world. But at the same time, the US Middle West has not really progressed as much as the East or the West Coast. Why? Because most of the Middle West was manufacturing, while the East and the West Coast were really about service jobs and other industries, not really manufacturing in the old-fashioned way. So that tells you what is the reason why Donald Trump has put this in the center of his agenda. COVID broke out in 2009, late 2019, and therefore that trade war got a bit of a halt. And then he lost power. He was impeached before that, and 4 years of Biden passed. But the moment he came into office, he immediately restarted the tariff war. And how? This time he was better prepared. He targeted not just Chinese, but every country around the world, pretty much every ally, every enemy. In fact, not even small islands with a few thousand people were spared. I'm told there were some uninhabited islands also that he's taxed or put off tariffs for. Of course, as of yesterday night, he has put a halt on this for 90 days. But what is at stake is basically this two different pivotal opposite views of what the US ought to be. Now, we must understand that the US is now a declining power, and China was, at least for until 2020, a rising power. And therefore, this whole battle to kind of um, take over the economic manufacturing aspect of the world global economy. Now, the thing is that for Trump, he really wants to take the Chinese down, and that is why he's doing this. And it's no wonder that as of yesterday, he's paused all tariffs for most countries except China. And now China has been given a very, very tough deal, as in 125%, whatever, 104% tariffs. Now, which means basically that, you know, a shirt that you bought from Chinese in your American store would today cost $40, what might have costed you 20 just a month back. So that is a huge impact, and therefore it will become uncompetitive, difficult, impossible for the Chinese to continue exporting to the US. And US is China's largest consumer. China is the largest exporter to the US apart from Mexico, and therefore this is a pivotal battle. And what lies at the center of it is the US dollar. But before I go further into this very interesting, very pivotal, very sickening at times, riveting spectacle of what is happening in the world of geoeconomics, I bring to you a small analysis so that you can kind of enjoy along with me what is exactly happening. So here we go. So basically, what the Americans have done is they've imposed tariffs on over 550 billion worth of Chinese uh, goods, and they have restricted Chinese firms like Huawei and TikTok. TikTok was recently. They've lobbied to exclude Chinese 5G infrastructure. That was a bit far back, but this is all part of this trade war. They've used tariffs to push companies to reshore manufacturing, and it isn't working. Threatened to delist Chinese firms from the US stock exchanges. You won't even believe the kind of things that the Chinese have gotten away with. They have looted the Americans, the Western world, right, left, and center. The opium wars be damned, because what the Chinese have done is really suck the Western world dry. They have also imposed up to 104% tariffs on Chinese electrical vehicles. Well, so this is one. Now, what has China done? Well, China has done its own tariffs on about 185 billion worth of US goods it imports, and it has reduced holdings of US treasury bonds, and therefore it holds about $750 billion worth of American treasury bonds, and it has sold about $50 billion in the last few days. That is a huge unloading, and what it'll do is it'll push up the interest rate for the Americans, or rather, reduce the capacity of the US Federal Reserve to reduce the rates. It has allowed the yuan to weaken to offset the tariffs, and it's pushed for self reliance in semiconductors. It has threatened to cut off rare earth mineral exports. Now, I'll repeat that. It has threatened to cut off rare earth mineral exports. This is at the center of this battle. The future is artificial intelligence. The future is really in computing. The future is really in the digital world. And what lies at the center of this is rare earth minerals. And would you believe it? China controls 90% of manufacturing for it. So how do you think US can get away? After all, the Chinese can just say, I'm not going to give you any of these rare earth minerals. So what will Americans do? Will they go to war? Is it not true that a lot of critical technology, or at least some technology, is imported by the Americans from China, even for their defense products like aircrafts and carriers and so on? It has strengthened trade ties with EU, Africa, and ASEAN. China has raised duties on agricultural imports and US wine. Now, this shows you what the two parties have done. On the one hand, China, and on the other hand, America. But you must remember that what appears to be um, a crazy old man called Donald J. Trump, really riling up everyone in the stock market, in the financial markets, um, everyone in the military around the world, every intellectual. Uh, they all think that Trump is really doing something wrong, and he's really creating instability when he need not. But go back to what I said. US is a declining power, and China was a rising power. Now, both of these things are not realized or accepted by both these parties. In other words, America thinks that can hold on to its unipolar hegemony, and the Chinese think that they can push away the Americans and claim that prize of being the hegemon of the world. Now, nothing can be further from the truth, because what these two are doing is really they're going to kill each other in trying to claim the prize. And why I say that is because both of them are interdependent. So while America is weakening, uh, China kind of helps the Americans by providing these cheap imports. But at the same time, it is weakening it because of all the malicious ways in it uses to do trade. Now, going back to the presentation, let me just bring it up for you. Um, so, we need to know who is going to actually win the war. Now, it is my contention that Donald Trump is really beating the hell out of the CCP, and I'm going to explain to you why. Number one, China's export dependency. So the Chinese are extremely dependent on export because they have created a economy which is dependent on exports. Yes, in the last 5 to 7 years, they've tried to veer their economy to become more internal consumption led, but they've had a lot of roadblocks in trying to do that. So they are really in trouble if the Americans were to stop purchasing their products, especially manufactured products. So any slowdown in the US or global economy also will hurt China directly. So in other words, if US catches a recession which is unrelated to what is happening today, even then China will suffer. And US is hard to replace as a buyer. Where will you find that kind of purchasing power? Europe is divided. It doesn't have the same kind of cohesion. It doesn't demand the same goods. It doesn't give them, the Chinese, the same access. So the rules of the game are different. And also, there is no dollar there. There's euro. So there are a lot of complications. It's not like US can be replaced by China so easily. There is a China internal economic weakness since the last 5 years. So there's a real estate crisis which has really eroded household wealth. You have seen what happened with Evergrande if you've been following the news. So a lot of real estate property builders have crashed or are in great debt, and that really will make it difficult for the Chinese economy to come back because uh, 30% of Chinese GDP was contributed to by the real estate sector. There was a crackdown by Xi Jinping, the president, on technology and private education. This has also hurt growth, and this was right after COVID. There were some internal issues, and he really went after these young upstarts. Post COVID, the growth has been uneven, and who knows how many were actually killed by COVID in China. Now, China have sold about $50 billion of its reserves in the last 20, 30 days or lesser. And it holds up to $750 billion of such treasuries. Now, it could come tomorrow and just sell off all the treasuries, and the US dollar will really, really be in trouble. And but the same will happen to its own value because it'll have no leverage left. It'll have no treasuries left, and it will also raise the value of yuan, which will hurt its own exports. So, in other words, the reserves are a two-edged sword. It cannot just simply dump them. He has to do it slowly. And $50 billion in such a pivotal time, it means that this is the max it can do. Maybe he'll do another $50 billion in another 2 weeks. The moment the Fed appears to be closer to a rate cut, he will do that. But in other words, he cannot dump all the dollars in a day, unlike what some people think. Uh, if the US has inflation because of this dumping or because of the tariffs, then what will happen is the US debt will come down in real terms, and there will be lower demand for Chinese goods, and therefore it'll shift the burden back to China because it'll be able to export lesser. So, in other words, if US hurts, so does China. Another reason. US still dominates technology and finance. You can argue that there are some areas where China has taken a lead. Electric vehicles is one of them, with BYD, telephone or mobile phones is another. But still, there is a lot of interdependency and dependency from the Chinese on the US technology, on the IPO markets. I mentioned that the US has shut down Chinese companies from a lot of its stock markets. So, global finance in many ways is US led. In fact, I would say this is one of the key things that the US controls in the world. which is global finance, and therefore the Chinese will hurt. Now, in the last 5 years, there's been a China plus one strategy into India, Mexico, Vietnam, and slowly these countries have been taking away some of the manufacturing. For instance, Apple has done that in India, shifted about 15-20% of its manufacturing. Now, obviously, that has led to some drain out of China. However, I must say that Vietnam is one country where China has dumped goods and used Vietnam to kind of sell its goods indirectly. So there is an argument to say that the supply chain weakness hasn't happened as much as one hoped. There is a de-risking which is happening more and more uh, at a higher pace because private companies are now a bit wary of China because of its geopolitical, geo-economic, and demographic issues, especially after COVID. So, US moves I've already covered. There is a lot of pressure on the Chinese. So that's all I had from the presentation perspective. So, in other words, I've explained that China is not going to win this trade war. It is. It has been given a weaker hand, but at the same time, if the US mishandles this trade war, if Trump makes a wrong move, if a war in a wrong area involving the US flares up, which drains the American attention, money, and resources, if the Chinese are very clever and they manage to cajole Trump with some concessions, all of this might not come to pass. But otherwise, what Donald Trump has done is it has decided that even though US is going to continue weakening, it'll weaken China as well. So what will happen is it'll become a real multilateral world. And whatever Donald Trump is trying to do, apart from this tariff war against China, is a bit contradictory because you have to understand that the US built its or the geopolitical influence in the last 40 years on the basis of having this reserve currency and importing goods from all over the world with a strong dollar. Now you can't become a exporter overnight and still have a strong dollar. So both these things cannot happen. So you can't have the reserve currency and be an exporter. You will have to be an importer and with a strong dollar. So I think Trump has got his economics wrong on that front. But as far as the tariff war with China goes, China is in trouble, big trouble, and Trump is to blame for that. Thank God for it. Thank you. I like you to share your views with me. Have I got any of this wrong? Are there other reasons why you think um, US can lose this battle uh, due to tactical or strategic mistakes, or have I? Is there any other uh, aspect you need to add? So do comment, and I will try and cover that in my next video. Thank you for watching. Good night. This was Samit from Talks on Ground.